Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Boyd, Butler, Capley, Chisholm, Clemens, Cochran, Crawford, Faison, Farmer, Freeman, Gamp, Garrett, Glenn, Hale, Hill, Halsey, Lamberth, Love, Representative Martin of Carroll, Parkinson, Rudd, Todd, Vaughn,
Here.
Representative Zachary, Vice Chairman Williams, and Chairman Hicks.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee of the first extraordinary session to order for January the 29th, 2025. Members, are there any personal orders this morning? I do have one. Just members, be sure to log into your voting block there where you're sitting if you don't care. That way we can make sure that we can turn your mic on at the appropriate time. So I do want to say that first. Any other personal orders? Yes, sir. Representative Parkinson, you recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. I do want to just mention this, and I may mention it on the floor also. My intern left here the day before yesterday in an ambulance, dealing with some of this stuff that's out there right now. And so I just want you to keep him in your prayers. Malik, very good guy. He's been with us. This is his second year with us as an intern. So keep him lifted up. Thank you. All
right. Thank you, Representative Parkinson. We'll certainly do that. Any other personal orders? All right, seeing none. We have two bills on our calendar today. We will begin with item number one. Item number one on our calendar is going to be House Bill 6001 by Leader Lamberth. You have a motion second. Sir, you're recognized for a brief description.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the fiscal impact of this bill on the corrective fiscal note is a fund of $5.5 million roughly that would assist local governments and local law enforcement in participating in the 287G program. And then there's $545,700 for positions for the new division that will coordinate with this administration on deportation of illegal immigrants. I stand ready for questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you very much. Members, you've heard the description of House Bill 6001. Is there any discussion? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you roll me a couple of spaces? I know there's other people want to talk on this.
Right now, I don't have anyone else on the list, so I'm happy to do that. But
well, let me jump in there before they call the question in. And I was actually formulating my question, and this is the immigration bill that was just heard in Immigration Committee and GovOps, correct? Okay, and so under this legislation, it allows it says it may, the Commissioner of the Department of Safety may create this separate department or that will oversee and align both local and state law enforcement with federal government's initiatives, including ICE, that deal with immigration removal. Am I correct? I mean, illegal immigrant or undocumented immigrant removal, correct?
Leader Lamberth.
You were right on illegal immigrant. That is the proper phrase on something like this. Mm-hmm. These are illegal immigrants, and so they are illegally here. And on page 1 of the bill, it actually creates. So it's not a may; it does create it.
Oh, okay. Mm.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, maybe I misread that. And under this bill, it makes it a felony for a local elected legislator, so such as city councils, county commissions, to, if they vote in favor, just the vote itself in favor of a sanctuary city, they will be charged with a felony for the vote.
Leader Lamberth.
They could be. In that instance, it is a may, because the district attorney in each judicial division has full discretion under the Constitution on what charges to bring. So it would depend on the facts of each circumstance, but they may be charged with a felony if they are trying to establish a sanctuary city, which is already defined in the code. If they are voting in favor of, if they are instituting the executive action, a sanctuary city within this state, it would potentially be a felony if the district attorney feels like the facts are there in order to be able to bring that. But again, the district attorney does have discretion on that.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sponsor. That's incredibly concerning to me that an individual who is duly elected by the public, who is doing his job as that elected official to cast a vote, just like it's our job to cast a vote, they would be charged with a felony for doing their job, for casting the vote. Because under this legislation, it doesn't say that, it says if you vote, which means pressing the button or voting yes, or if you vote, you will be charged with a felony. If you vote yes for it, not if you vote no, but if you vote yes for it, you will be charged with a felony. That's incredibly undemocratic and problematic when you have individuals that elect these individuals to say yes or no. And so
Leader Lambert.
So every city and county in the state is a subdivision of the state, obviously. And so we are saying that it is illegal to establish those sanctuary city policies. We're going to fully cooperate with the federal government in removing illegal immigrants from this country so that a legal immigration process can go forward. So just like we would not allow a local official to legalize drunk driving within their jurisdiction. I mean, they're not allowed to do that. Official misconduct is already on the books, and it is an e-felony to commit that particular crime. And so we're just adding to that as a state, we're saying it is illegal to establish those sanctuary city policies. We're simply not going to have that. And so the easiest way for any local official who is duly elected to avoid this is don't vote to establish sanctuary cities in this state, period. You can vote on anything else you want to, but that in itself is criminal. We're not going to have sanctuary cities in this state.
Representative Parkinson.
thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a couple more questions, but it's one thing. Number one, if this state says you cannot establish a sanctuary city, then it doesn't matter if they vote to establish a sanctuary city or not. They won't be able to establish a sanctuary city because the state law says you cannot. That's one thing. The other thing, if we remember, and Mr. Chair, I'm about to say something, but this is pertaining to this law. If you remember, we passed legislation that was counter to federal law, but it became trigger legislation in the event that federal law changed. And how would that look if the federal government said, if you even vote for this and the federal law says a different thing, you will be charged with a federal felony? And that's in essence what we are saying to these council members and commissioners with under this legislation. If you vote for it, this should not be illegal or felonious to cast a vote as an elected official. And that's where this is problematic at.
Leader Lambert.
So those are very different situations in this particular country because we are a United States of America. And so we are, by the states, we grant the federal government certain powers. Those are granted at the very beginning. And then we retain everything else to the people or to the states. And so because of the fact that the counties and the cities are subdivisions of the state of Tennessee, we are able to put prohibited acts into the statute that they are simply not allowed to do. And voting to establish a sanctuary city is just that. We're not going to have that here in the state of Tennessee. Pretty easy law not to break. Just don't do that.
Right. Thank you, Mr. And this is my wrap up question. With under this legislation, it appears that we are aligning our state to align with the president's administration in regards to rounding up and deporting those that are undocumented in our state. And my question to you is, does this include the ability for those individuals that are in charge of detaining these individuals that are undocumented? Does this include them having the ability to do this inside of our churches, inside of our schools, and also right here in Cordell Hull building and the Capitol building?
Leader Lamberth.
So this bill doesn't go into everything you just mentioned there. I will say that, again, undocumented is an inaccurate term because that means, look, you left your driver's license at home or something. You don't have your documentation to drive with you. That's a low-level misdemeanor in our code. It's driving without a license, something that, quite frankly, I've tried to update in the past, where if you just don't happen to have your documentation on you, that in itself, again, is a low-level crime or no crime at all. What we're talking about here is folks that have entered the United States illegally, are illegal immigrants, and are remaining here and committed a new crime every single day because they are illegal immigrants. And so we are cooperating with the federal government. They have to follow all of their policies and procedures and all the constitutional provisions and protections that are already in place in order to be able to do that. And that is also why we're establishing this division, to make sure that if there are going to be federal agents that are going to be operating within this state to enforce federal law, that again, they are removing illegal immigrants as they should, but that legal residents and U.S. citizens that in no way are being affected at all. And so that is the goal of this legislation, is that we focus simply on the illegal immigrants and not anyone else.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is my last one. I appreciate the semantics on undocumented versus illegal. Okay. And so my final question to that point would be, if under this new division of individuals that are whose goal is to detain and possibly deport those that you say are, I say, undocumented, if they come upon an individual who does not have his or her documents with them, so they're undocumented at that moment, how will that, are they going to get a chance to go home and pick up their documents? Are they going to get a chance, or will they be treated as if they are illegal?
Leader Lamberth.
So the way that happens now is the exact same way it would happen after this bill. So anyone who is stopped for a speeding ticket, arrested on something, they will ask for identification. And that's how it happens right now. If somebody doesn't have their driver's license on them, they're able to give a name, many times a date of birth, social security number, some identifying information so that they can run them through their system. Everything is computerized now. So most officers have a computer in their car even that they can run that through. And usually if they're able to pull up something, and a lot of times it has a picture associated with it, and they're like, oh, okay, that's that person, no big deal. And again, usually either a minor misdemeanor, it's a ticket of some sort, or just a warning of, hey, make sure you're carrying your license with you when you're driving. That's when this comes up most of the time. Now, if for some reason they're not able to do that, there was a gentleman that used to come into our courts on a pretty regular basis. He knew his brother's social security number, knew his brother's date of birth. He would give that information a lot of times when he was arrested. And unfortunately, then he wouldn't show up for court and they'd go arrest his brother, thinking that he had been arrested for something. That unfortunately does happen sometimes, but usually what they will do if there's any suspicion of that is then they will proceed to a fingerprint database to then run fingerprints if there's no other identification. So they try to go through every possible way to find out who someone is, both with a name and date of birth database, and then progressing to a fingerprint database. And it's only if they can establish that someone is illegally here that they would contact ICE. Otherwise, it just goes through the regular state protocols. Just one other example, there was a man that was arrested in Sumner County one time, and it was a very bizarre situation. It's back when I was a district attorney. He fought the police officers over a worthless check charge. I mean, it was a relatively low-level charge, big fight in a grocery store, all this kind of stuff. He gets arrested for a variety of crimes and does about a year and a half, and they finally got a fingerprint hit back. Then it didn't work as well as it does now. It's pretty quick, but then it took them some time, and they figured out this guy had like warrants out in some of their state, had a big long prison sentence and everything else. So they do everything they can to identify someone. Back then it took more time. Now it's extremely quick, but they're going through all that protocol before they would ever get to a point where they would contact ICE.
Representative Parkinson. All right, thank you. Next on the list is Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have a couple of questions about some of this fiscal note, but also a couple of questions about some statements that were just made. You seem to be focusing on what you referred to as illegal immigrants, and so my question is, why are we removing lawful permanent residence rights as well? You seem to be focused, you said this focused on illegal immigrants, as you called them, but this eliminates the rights of lawful permanent residents. Why is that?
Leader Lamberth.
That's not my interpretation of it. Would you like to point to a section?
Yeah, section 10.
Thanks.
Current law says to any person who's not a United States citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States, and you're substituting to any person who is not a U.S. citizen. expressly removing the language for lawful permanent residents and requiring additional steps for them as well. So I'm just curious as to why we would incur the cost as a state for that purpose.
Leader Lambert.
And again, it references in that same section, the U.S. Code on that, which is what deals with illegal immigration. So no one's rights are being removed. That literally is still dealing with illegal immigration.
Well, why are we removing lawful permanent resident from the language of our code for that purpose?
Leader Lambert.
Again, there's a cross-reference to the federal code that deals with illegal immigration right there in that same section.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I've read that, and that doesn't protect those lawful permanent residents. So we're expressly I'm assuming for some reason, lawful permanent residents are being targeted as well. And I'm just trying to figure out why we would expend resources to punish or require additional administrative hurdles for lawful permanent residents.
Leader Lambert.
Again, I would disagree with your interpretation of that, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, may I continue?
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this first page and well, let me go to the cost first. You described the cost of this piece of legislation as just over $5 million, and that's to fund the grant program, correct? That's what you said?
Leader Lambert.
That is incorrect.
Okay, can you clarify?
Sure. The general fund has a one-time expenditure of $5.5 million. It's actually $5,563,700. And then there is a recurring expense of $545,700 for the positions.
Okay, so that leads to my next question is why are we expending those additional funds, $500 some odd thousand for positions? And I'm looking at the detailed, roles of these positions, and I find it hard to believe that Governor Bill Lee in the state of Tennessee isn't already overseeing state and local collaboration with federal immigration agencies. That seems to be such a priority these days for y'all, facilitating efficient communication between state, local, federal agencies with respect to immigration policy, allocating resources, and distribution of grants, strategic immigration enforcement plans. That seems to me, I've heard y'all talk about this for years. I've heard Governor Bill Lee, talk about all these issues. And so I'm just wondering why his 7th year of his term, is he just now getting around to codifying this? And are we not already doing these things? Because that would seem to be a failure of duty on his part if he's not doing these things that he seems so important.
Leader Lambert.
And unfortunately, the last 4 years, we put in a predicament where the border was porous and nobody was deported at all for being an illegal immigrant. In fact, they were welcomed in droves. And so our president at that time, thankfully now former president, tied the hands of our governor. And so now we have different leadership in Washington. And I'm confident in President Trump, with Governor Lee's cooperation and ours, we can actually deport illegal immigrants and not have any effect on lawful residents, lawful immigrants, and U.S. citizens. So thankfully, there's a new sheriff in town in the White House, and things will get back to normal.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, gosh, this governor came into office when the first, 2 years of his time in office, Trump was in office too. And there was a lot of talk about immigration then. And I'm just surprised nothing happened in that time. And I'm curious as to why, this grant program that seems to be the bulk of this funding is to incentivize local governments with these, dangle this carrot of this substantial amount of money to them. But I think I heard you say that the felony issue with regards to local governments on the sanctuary city, basically making it a felony to disagree with you. Perhaps there's a cost associated with that. So DAs obviously have the discretion whether or not to prosecute that, I think you said, and is right. But the Attorney General is mandated to take action in this language. And so I'm curious why we are not appropriating funds for the additional court costs, administrative fees, Attorney General budget, clerk's offices and all that. So how come that's not reflected in here if that's a real concern?
Leader Lambert.
And Chairman, as you know, the best place to find that information is right in the actual wording of the fiscal note each and every time. So it is assumed state and local government officials are currently in compliance or will choose to comply with the provisions of the legislation. Therefore, there will not be sufficient change in the number of prosecutions for state or local governments to experience any significant change in revenue or expenditures. Then just down from there, the proposed legislation requires the AG to initiate an action to remove a state or local government official from office if the official fails to comply with such court order. They have sufficient resources to be able to do that, and the assumption of the fiscal note from our able staff is that local government officials will actually comply with the law, which is what I would assume as well.
Chairman Clemens.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you reading that. I mean, it seems to be that those things are already being done, and there's no one expected to violate this, so it kind of questions what's the need for it. And then, of course, it always says, as with other parts in here, it could result in an increase in state expenditures. It could result in an increase. And so I guess, we have a fiscal duty here, so I just want to make sure we're covering all the potential of cost with this. The language of the bill refers to the provision in the law that discusses the governmental entity, the local government, or the state official, local official. I don't know how you make a governmental entity or a local government a felon. I guess there's a little vagueness in here as to whether or not you're going to prosecute the county mayor or the city mayor for signing a bill or the council members for voting on the bill, because that doesn't actually enact a piece of legislation. There seems to be a lot of inherent issues in here that's just going to ripe for constitutional debate and court action that's going to cost this state a lot of money. And so as fiscal stewards of state tax dollars, I would hate to see us incur those additional costs. And with regard to, again, requiring even lawful residents to get a new ID or have some sort of designation on their ID, I don't see any additional cost in here for the DMV, for overtime, for additional caseload that, required, or the cost of printing new licenses, those types of things. So can you speak to that for me?
Leader Lamberth.
Well, not so much me, but fiscal review, again, on page 5, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph down. I'll give you a second to find that.
Oh, I'm on it. I got it underlined.
Then I'll read it to you. Then it is assumed that the required software changes of the department A-list system can be accomplished by the vendor under the current contractual agreement, and it goes on from there. That would ordinarily be a $97,000 quote to just change their system. Again, that ensures that a legal resident, their license looks slightly different than a U.S. citizen. And then that license would not be valid for anything that is only valid for a U.S. citizen. So in other words, that individual should not be registering to vote or voting. We know from just this last election, there were over 13,000 people that received a letter from the Secretary of State because the databases didn't match up. Their citizenship was in question. Now, some of those folks may have become U.S. citizens when they first got a license until that time, but there were several hundred that went in and took their names off the rolls because obviously they had not. And so we don't ever want to put someone in a place where they inadvertently break the law, especially a felony law, which it is to vote if you are not a U.S. citizen or if you're a convicted felon and have not retained your voting rights back. So when someone gets a license and they're a legal resident, it will look just slightly different than what a U.S. citizen's license is, and that's included within the cost of a once-a-year change within that system.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Leader, I see what you did there. I'm not going to bite on that. But I would just like to point out, that 5th bullet to which you referred is a great indicator, and what I was referring to earlier, that this could result in an increase in state expenditures of $97,000. That's the exact language. It's unclear. We don't know that exact dollar amount. And so, it's just, if we're going to spend taxpayers' dollars, and, we need to evaluate whether or not we're already doing this. Why aren't we already doing this? If this is something that's not going to incur additional costs, is it because we're already doing it? If we just keep spending taxpayers' money right and left and throwing it around like it's monopoly money. And so I just want to make sure that we're being good stewards here and got these numbers right. So thank you for answering my questions.
All right. Thank you. Leader Lamberth, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And after a decade of serving together, I'm just encouraged that you finally become a fiscal conservative. Thank you, sir.
All right. Representative Love, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the sponsor. This piece of legislation, I have a question about who it applies to. If a person has a 1-year visa to come to the country legally and close to the date of the visa expiring, they unfortunately end up in a car accident or have some incident that hospitalizes them. And while they're in the hospital, their visa expires. Does this law then apply to them in a situation that was out of their control?
Leader Lamberth.
Yes, because we will have those liaisons there with the federal government. When you have situations like that are beyond someone's control, they can coordinate with ICE. And we had similar situations under previous administrations where those type of things happen. And so life gets in the way, something can occur, and you look at each circumstance on its own. And so in many circumstances like that, paperwork can be rushed through. Someone can renew their visa. I mean, even if there was an intervening issue there. So that's part of what these folks would do, is to help out in those circumstances, and what our local law enforcement officers already do under the 287G program. So it's not that every single person that might have an issue with ICE gets deported. It is literally a case-by-case basis. But what we insist on our friends from the federal government in this circumstance, and in most, is to get us an answer quickly. And that's why there's some of the fund there to be able to assist with that. That should always be a very short-term hold on their part, and they should be liaison with the federal government just in case a circumstance like that were to happen.
Representative Love.
Thank you. And I do have concerns about that because having applied for a visa to go to another country, I know that our process can sometimes be very cumbersome. And I'd hate for someone who is here and has taken all the steps because of the policy we're putting in place to then be subject to being pulled out of school if they're here on a visa to attend school or to work, and it expires. But because of the language in the bill where local law enforcement will be engaged in this, that it just becomes a bit more cumbersome for the process for us to go through that. So I wanted to raise the issue. Second piece I wanted to raise is this. My colleagues have commented about local elected officials engaging in voting for sanctuary policies. Does that include local elected officials who might vote for a resolution speaking of the benefits of a sanctuary city or endorsing the possible future idea of a sanctuary city?
Leader Lambert.
So, and just as we do, an honoring resolution that would take no action, I would not interpret to be in violation of one of these, of this particular bill. It's going to take something where you are actually putting a policy in place. So voting in favor of a policy that specifically is putting into place a sanctuary city policy within that city. If it is a resolution just saying, hey, this is our opinion on this, this is something we think you should consider, that in my interpretation, and I think I know that we don't have the lawyers in this committee to answer that question, but I have asked that previously, and just an honoring resolution would not cross the line into this.
Okay, and I do have
Representative Love.
I do have concerns because I think sometimes when we pass legislation, you and myself and others who are here, we pass it. I wouldn't pass it, but we do things for a particular issue. And then when we're gone, and it was our understanding of what it was supposed to be, we're not here to explain to those who are enforcing the law that that was never our intent. And so I just want to caution us as we go down this path that there are some things that we may need to consider. Some protection, some hold harmless in there, some clarifying language that'll help us with that.
Leader Lambert.
Thank you. And that section that you're talking about actually is in the current code. In the last committee, I actually grabbed the code book, and afterwards, we can snag that because I think it is laid out very clearly in there. But that was passed by previous legislatures. So laying out what a sanctuary city is, what a sanctuary city policy is, all that is laid out in the current code. It's not in this bill, but it references that code.
All right. Thank you very much. Next on the list is Representative Chisholm.
Thank you, Chairman. To the sponsor, we spoke a little bit about the driver's licenses. So for our permanent residents, they'll only be able to get a temporary license.
Leader Lambert.
So they have a license expiration date on theirs just as we do on ours. And so that expiration date is a specific date. So we're not changing that drastically. It still has a date on there that there would be an expiration of that. And so the main change that we're making here is that a legal resident or even legal permanent resident, their license is going to look slightly different than a U.S. citizen's license. And then that license of the legal resident, again, these people are legally here. They have gone through the proper process to come to the United States, which is what we want people to do, use the legal process. They can drive here. They can pass the test and everything else. They can drive here, but they can't vote. They can't obtain services that are only reserved for a U.S. citizen. So that's why it's just a slight difference on the color of the license, similar to what we do for younger people when they're first getting their license. I mean, their license is vertical. That's a much more drastic change than what I'm talking about on this, but it's a graduated driver's license that looks slightly different than the license that you and I have. And so that's all we're looking for on this, is that it would be slightly different, so that it would differentiate, especially for voting and things like that.
Representative Chisholm.
How much shorter would these licenses term be than a regular driver's license?
Leader Lamberth.
I'll have to give a safety on that. I don't recall that we changed that around drastically as far as what their expirations are, because that is normally matched up with how long they are allowed to be in the country. And so the way it's been described to me with safety previously is that they try to match that up with how long they're supposed to legally be here. But I'll be happy to check with them again on that.
Representative Chisholm.
Okay, so we've been hearing this term all day, which is unintended consequences. So I do have some concerns. So let me ask the question first before I go into that. How would these roundups be conducted? Would it be based on traffic stops, or we see somebody walking down the street and say he looks like an immigrant, or how would we go about enforcing it?
Leader Lamberth.
By the way, I just was able to find this. So the license we were talking about would be no more than 8 years, just like ours is currently, or the length of their stay, whichever is shorter. So if you had a 1-year visa, then your license would be for 1 year. But it would be no longer than 8 years, just as like the regular license that a U.S. citizen would get. And so that's how it matches up. As far as the other, I mean, I'm not aware. I mean, we're already couple of weeks into this president's term. They are obviously targeting illegal immigrants that have also committed some pretty heinous crimes, part of gangs and everything else. And that's a part of kind of the normal law enforcement processes of trying to go after violent criminals. That's how I would imagine that this would progress. And it's how it did. I mean, this president was president once before for 4 years. And what the 287G program and other programs that we are participating in with the federal government is usually when there is a contact with an illegal immigrant through the normal course of business. So, someone is arrested for a domestic assault. And at the exact same time, when they're booking them in, it comes to their attention that they're also an illegal immigrant. So that's when that would be alerted to ICE, and ICE would have to get back pretty quickly to say, yes, we wish to deport that person or not.
Representative Chisholm.
Yeah, well, I understand targeting those that have been arrested for violent crimes and things like that, but I have a concern for our people who are not violent criminals, who are here. Would there be business raids? Because, TV shows us some weird stuff sometimes. And I just want to make sure the state of Tennessee, we're not participating in causing, even by unintended consequences, causing harassment and things of that nature.
Leader Lamberth.
No, I don't anticipate any type of harassment or anything like that to occur. The 287G program has been out there for quite some time. It has worked very well. It's when law enforcement, again, comes in contact with someone in the normal course of their business. Now, as far as businesses, I mean, it is required in this state that under, I think it's the I-9 form, that you have to get information from an individual when you hire a person to prove that they are not an illegal immigrant. They have to be they have to legally be able to work here or be a U.S. citizen for somebody to be hired. So we've had those programs on the book for quite some time. And in fact, most of those are computerized now, where you can just enter that data in and it gets an answer back pretty quick. And so virtually all of our businesses use those type of programs. Now, I have seen in years past where you had businesses that were bad actors that wound up running afoul of both state and federal law by hiring illegal immigrants. This doesn't change any of that. The same processes used in the past to hold those businesses accountable would still be in place. This just doesn't change that.
Representative Chisholm.
Okay, last question. I just want to make sure that we're not arresting and obtaining and stopping people because of how they look. So what rail guards do we have in this piece of legislation to keep from, the unintended consequence of, hey, this person doesn't look like me, so let me stop and see if they.
Leader Lamberth.
Yeah, that in no way, shape, form, or fashion is allowed under the current U.S. or Tennessee Constitution. That is prohibited both under law and under practices and policies within every department within this state. You are not allowed to stop someone just based on the way they look, period, no matter what that look is. It may shock you to believe that there are folks in this room that aren't wild about my haircut. They've made that pretty clear and stuff that they yell out from time to time. I respect that, but you know what? I can't get stopped for that. So just because you don't like the way somebody looks doesn't mean you can stop that. You can't stop them for that reason. And so that didn't happen before this bill. It's not going to happen after this bill.
All right. Thank you, Representative Chisholm. All right. I have no one else on the list, so we are ready to vote. Madam Clerk, please take the
John
roll.
already wants me stopped.
Representatives Baum. Baum votes aye. Representative Boyd. Boyd votes aye. Butler. Butler votes aye. Capley. Capley votes aye. Chisholm. Chisholm votes no. Clemens. Clemens votes no. Cochran. Cochran votes aye. Crawford. Crawford votes aye. Faison. Representative Faison. Farmer. Representative Farmer. Freeman. Gant. Gant votes aye. Garrett. Garrett votes aye. Glenn. Glenn votes no. Hale. Hale votes aye. Hill. Hill votes aye. Hulsey. Hulsey votes aye. Lambert. Lambert votes aye. Love. Love votes no. Martin of Carroll. Martin votes aye. Parkinson. Parkinson votes no. Rudd. Rudd votes aye. Todd. Todd votes aye. Vaughn. Vaughn votes aye. Zachary. Zachary votes aye. Vice Chairman Williams. Williams votes aye. Chairman Hicks of Hawkins.
Aye.
Chairman Hicks votes aye. Mr. Chairman, you have 19 ayes and 5 noes.
All right, the ayes have it. So House Bill 6001 moves on to calendar and rules. All right, that brings us to item number 2 on our calendar. Item number 2 on our calendar is going to be House Bill 6007 by Chairman Faison. And Chairman, you have a motion and a second. Chairman and committee, yesterday we adopted an amendment on the bill, drafting code 002525. So without objection, we will reconsider our actions and withdraw that amendment. So without objection, so moved. We're back on the bill, and there has been a new amendment that has been filed on this bill, and that drafting code, Chairman Faison, is 2578. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Yes, sir. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we at least hear what the amendment does?
Be glad to. Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Representative Parkinson, great question. We, since we did take our time with this, we were able to identify an issue with our EMS workers on the part of the shared resources through county to city to local governments, contiguous governments in an emergency program, that only the mayor would be able to send out EMS. And we wanted to make sure that was clarified, that police chief to police chief, fireman to fireman, fire chief to fire chief. So that's what that amendment does.
Representative Parkinson.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, you've heard the description. Any other discussion? Again, we are on amendment 0. Make sure I've got the right one. 002578. That's the amendment we're on. Further discussion on the amendment. Hearing none, seeing none. We're now voting on drafting code 002578 on to House Bill 6007. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Back on the bill as amended. And Chairman Faison, you're recognized for description on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, excuse me. This is the bill we had yesterday that would, sorry about that, that would bring our local Tennessee friends who own property, whether it's a business or a residence in East Tennessee that were damaged by the Hurricane Helene. This is a grant that is equivalent to 130% of the taxes that are due for the property of that business or house. And other than that, it's just trying to help out our people. I will add, I've had the question, the water cooler and other people, Jeremy, why are we helping these individuals out in a way that we've not historically ever set a precedent to help for hurricanes or floods like we had here in Nashville or tornadoes? So I think that's a fair question that the committee needs to hear kind of my thoughts behind this. I don't know if most of y'all realize this, but there's a vast majority of our properties that were destroyed that were outside of the 100-year floodplain. That means that their insurance did not cover their damage. There's a huge majority of my constituents and those of us that live in East Tennessee, they actually had property on the water. For whatever reason, were never told to buy this type of insurance because this hasn't happened in years. They didn't know they had to have that. So the only help they have got so far is either through 501c3s that have helped them. Through FEMA has showed up and helped a little bit, but nowhere near what the loss they sustained. Typically, in other parts of the state, you would have had insurance for this, such as a tornado. Your homeowner's insurance would have covered this. Homeowner's insurance didn't cover anything for the vast majority of the people who got hit in this storm. So this was an attempt for me to be able to obviously not make our people whole, but at least give them something to help as they rebuild. And I would remind the committee that we still have constituents in Northeast Tennessee that still don't have a home. They're not ready yet to move in, and there are people still living in campers right now.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Faison, for the description. Members, any discussion? Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Faison. Yesterday, I was one of those water cooler guys, and had an opportunity to talk with Chairman Faison about this. As he alluded to before, unfortunately, tragedy is not something new to Tennessee. We have a lot of those events, and as he described earlier, this even though it is precedent setting, I think one of the issues that makes this different that I think we should all support is the fact that most of these people, because it was a flood event and it was of great proportions, insurance, whether you had flood insurance or didn't have flood insurance or you had homeowners insurance or no, it was an uninsurable event in most cases for those people who didn't have those. And so this grant process that Representative Faison or Chairman Faison and his colleagues have got together gave me a pause or concern in the beginning because historically we've not been able to find a way in order to do this based upon someone's actual loss. But in his diligence working with the Comptroller's office, they found a way to do this that sets a precedent. I will say that what makes it this unique is that it was an uninsurable event, but it's also restricted only to this event through the FEMA declaration for that 4-day period where most of these people lost. Of course, Chairman Faison knows I'm from Upper East Tennessee. He was originally born and raised there. These are people that I went to high school with and spent my young years, childhood years with. And so the effects are pretty dramatic. And so, of course, this benefit or grant only assists those people who have lost property that own the property. There are a lot of people that there's not really a formulary to help. And I look forward to working with Chairman Faison when we go into a full session in order to try to find a way to help those other folks who are not going to get the assistance that they need, that are struggling in probably similar fashion, if not greater than those who are property owners. For instance, someone who might have leased property, but they may have lost everything as well. And so I want to thank Chairman Faison. I also want to apologize to Comptroller Emeritus Wilson because I asked him, asked Chairman Faison yesterday to allow us to have a little bit of time to discuss, and I kept him away from his regular bedtime yesterday, and so I apologize for that, Comptroller, and appreciate Comptroller Mumpower for answering a lot of my questions. I feel much more comfortable about it today and the patience that Chairman Faison did. So I encourage my colleagues, even though it's new to us, it's something and a vehicle of precedence that we set that might help their communities in out years. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Chairman Williams. Chairman Faison.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chairman Faison. You know, I appreciate you bringing this legislation, you know, for your people. I think it's an incredible, great effort. I had similar legislation. As a matter of fact, I think I was the one that created this formula that you're using for to recruit police, fire, and nurses to Memphis and Shelby County by offering them a grant that would match the same amount as their property taxes when they purchased homes in Memphis and Shelby County. But interestingly enough, I was told after moving the bill that it was unconstitutional. So my question is, how did we get around the constitutionality of alleviating individuals' property taxes when it says in the Constitution that we're not supposed to do that?
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Parkinson. It's a great question. I would encourage you to join our party and be able to pet. No, I'm just kidding. So, Representative Parkinson, what we've done that we believe this is constitutional, and we've ran this by the Attorney General, is this is not a property tax relief. This is a property tax grant that is equivalent to 130% of what your property taxes would be. And since it is a grant that they can apply for through the comptroller's office, that's how this is constitutional.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Sponsor. I'm 100% with you, and that is exactly what the previous bill did. Same language, same idea, right? And but not 130%, but 100%. And I was told multiple times that it was unconstitutional. So I'm just trying to understand and I'm voting for this bill. So I'm for this, but I'm also for, you know, the original formula language that may have been borrowed to for us to recruit our people, our police and fire and nurses. And so I was just trying to understand, is there a difference because it's the exact same language? What is different about your legislation that made it constitutional versus previous iterations of it?
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Parkinson, I would say we would have to ask legal what the difference is. And
Okay.
I'm not sure when you brought your bill up, how many years ago and who was then there, but
Right.
they would have to answer that, and potentially moving forward, we need to look at that moving forward.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. But I don't think the Constitution has changed since then. But since about 3 years ago. But let me ask this last question. This is just more of a technical question. Those individuals, you said a lot of your people were uninsurable because of the locations of their homes and so on and so forth, and some were insured, right? And you know, so will this bill cover only those that were uninsurable, or will it cover those that were insured also?
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Parkinson, every house or business that was damaged during the storm has been identified by our property tax assessors, and they have worked with the comptroller's office to identify every single property, and we've accounted for each property in our fiscal note. If you happen to have a piece of property that was damaged during Hurricane Helene, you will be able to apply for this grant, regardless if your insurance kicked in or not.
Just one
Representative
last one. And thank you for that. And so the assessor provided the information to the comptroller. So what happens if by chance someone's property was left out?
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Parkins, from my understanding, because of the technology and the geo-tracking and Google Earth, all of our assessors, according to our beloved, or not so beloved, our new comptroller, every property that was damaged, they are aware of, and they have assessed every property, and no one was missed by all these counties.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Chairman Williams.
Thank you. In an effort to phone a friend, I think it'd be interesting to put on the record really what makes this different, because like you, Representative Parkinson, the tornadoes in 2020 ravaged my community. I tried to do the same thing. It was unconstitutional. What's different about this is you cannot use these dollars in order to make counties and cities whole as it relates to the lack of property taxes. What this does is it was using the property tax because someone may have a $100,000 home or someone may have a $400,000 home. And that was a mechanism by which we could determine what we were going to pay that individual person in the grant. If they, in the property taxes was just used as a formulary. It's not, these monies are, the intent was to provide relief to the individuals that were impacted by it, not to make the counties and cities whole. Although my community was devastated by the tornadoes, we weren't able to make them whole either because we couldn't do that. But we can make an attempt at making individual homeowners whole because we're using that as a formulary. So if you lost your multi-million-dollar home, you would get a little bit more than someone and I'm not saying you have a multi-million-dollar home. I'm just saying someone would get more than someone who would get less. And so that's what makes this pass the constitutional muster different than what you and I did for our individual communities years ago.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Williams. Representative Parks, to follow up.
Yes, sir. And no, I'm sorry, Chairman Williams. It's not different. I don't know. It may be different than what you did, but it's not different than what I did. And because my legislation was not making cities and counties whole either. It was just offsetting the property taxes, just like this legislation is doing. So, but thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, members, I have no one else on the. Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Motion on the bill.
All right. Question. I'll take question. There you go. Any objection to call the question? Hearing none, seeing none. We are now voting. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Baum. Baum votes aye. Boyd. Boyd votes aye. Butler. Butler votes aye. Capley. Capley votes aye. Chisholm. Chisholm votes aye. Clemens. Clemens votes aye. Cochran. Cochran votes aye. Crawford. Crawford votes aye. Faison. Faison votes aye. Farmer. Farmer votes aye. Freeman. Gant. Gant votes aye. Garrett. Garrett votes aye. Glenn. Glenn votes aye. Hale. Hale votes aye. Hill. Hill votes aye. Hulsey. Hulsey votes aye. Lamberth. Lamberth votes aye. Love. Love votes aye. Martin of Carroll. Martin votes aye. Parkinson. Parkinson votes aye. Rudd. Rudd votes aye. Todd. Todd votes aye. Vaughn. Vaughn votes aye. Zachary. Zachary votes aye. Vice Chairman Williams. Williams votes aye. Chairman Hicks.
Aye.
Chairman Hicks votes aye. Mr. Chairman, you have 26 ayes.
All right. Thank you very much. This motion carries. House Bill 6007 moves on to calendar and rules. All right, committee, that completes our calendar for the day, and I would like to make a quick announcement. Those that are on calendar and rules and those that would like to join in for calendar and rules, it does meet immediately following finance this morning. So members, do we have any further business coming before the committee? Seeing none, without objection, we do stand in recess. No objection, we are in recess.